Vince Vaughn used to be the biggest name in comedy, but then his career came crashing down. His fall from grace was filled with lawsuits, arrests, and a controversy so big that it sparked a national debate about what you can and can't say in a movie. And the craziest part is that almost none of this was actually Vince's fault. So how did Vince Vaughn go from starring in Wedding Crashers to this infamous mugshot to completely disappearing? The moment that started all of this is not what you think, because Vince Vaughn didn't come from a typical Hollywood background at all. In fact, he might have been one of the least likely people to actually make it in Hollywood. His path would have been considered strange for literally anyone, let alone a future Hollywood star. And it actually explains a lot about what happens later. In high school, he played football, basketball, and wrestled, which should come as no surprise given his 6'5" stature and athletic build. But this is where things get strange, because at the same time, he was doing musical theater.
Believe it or not, it was musical theater, so I just kept doing it. I started going to the city and training more seriously.
And I don't know about you, but I can think of literally 0 people at my high school who both played football and did musical theater. But somehow that's not even the strangest part of Vince's high school years, because when he wasn't laying someone out on the football field or singing in a musical, he was sitting in his high school's Oval Office.
Is it true that you were class president at Lake Forest High School?
I was. That's exactly right.
If you're class president, they'll let you speak at graduation. If you speak at graduation, the school has to let you graduate?
100%.
It was at the same time that he really fell in love with improv, though he had no idea that this would fundamentally change his life forever.
I did improv when I was a kid in Chicago, when I was in high school, because there was a improv Olympic that was an offshoot of Second City. It was just a place to go train, and it was fun. It wasn't that big of a deal.
It was this unconventional path that set him up to eventually take over Hollywood. But first he had to get there. This wasn't some perfect system. He really came up from his hard work and built it all from scratch. Yet when he first got to LA, none of this really seemed to matter at all, because things didn't move so smoothly. He didn't go straight from high school to movie sets like some actors. In fact, it was actually the exact opposite. For a while, he couldn't even break into the industry at all. Like, nothing was working for him. With the goal of becoming a movie actor, the best he could do at first was a Chevy commercial, which he views as his first big break.
We have the Chevy commercial.
Legendary Chevy Camaro. Remember all the times you told yourself that someday you'd have one? Welcome to someday.
But even that didn't open the doors that you'd expect. He'd hoped to be able to ride that momentum into more traditional film work, but he couldn't even land an agent despite numerous attempts. Which in hindsight is actually insane when you think about the fact that Vince Vaughn, of all people, was actually being ignored by even small Hollywood agents. But he always had a great sense of humor throughout the process.
I've just done a national Chevy commercial, and I'm interested in meeting with you guys discussing representation. But she said, Vince, we only handle movie stars. We don't take undeveloped talent. But I can refer you to a small agency. I said, I'm not completely sure I'm signing with you, ma'am.
The reality is that things still weren't working, and it got to a point where almost everyone else would have given up. He would struggle for the next several years to find work anywhere in the film industry, with his biggest break coming as an uncredited extra in the 1991 flop, For the Boys. But his hard work and persistence didn't stop, and his life would change forever in the fall of 1992 when he landed a role in the sports biopic, Rudy. And this moment would end up being way more important than it sounds. Not only was this his first real film role, it was also the film set where he met his future partner in crime, Jon Favreau. That relationship would end up changing everything. And this is where all of that persistence finally started to pay off. Little did he, or John for that matter, have any idea the implications this would have. The two would reunite just a few years later and take Hollywood into their own hands. Instead of waiting for someone to cast them, they made their own movie in 1996, Swingers. And this wasn't some big studio production. It was a low-budget gamble that barely even got made. The movie was Vince's first real shot at doing comedy, and it tells the story of the trials and tribulations of 3 unemployed Hollywood actors. And looking back, this is definitely where things started to click. You really see the early beginnings of what would become the comedy legend in Vince.
Bring a single malted Glengarry for me and one for my boy Mikey here. I want you to run along because I'll be timing you. I'm gonna keep time. 1, 2, 3.
Ron Livingston, best known for Office Space, stars alongside Vince and John, and the movie is directed by Doug Liman, who would go on to direct blockbuster hits including The Bourne Identity and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which is absolutely insane when you think about how small this movie actually was. The movie was made when they were all complete nobodies, yet they all went on to have highly successful careers. And that's the thing, this movie could have easily been something that almost nobody watched. I mean, the movie was only made for $250,000 and was really seen as more of a fun project with friends rather than a real Hollywood film. And when you do this level of DIY filmmaking, it comes with serious hurdles.
We had pulled over on the highway to do that scene where police cars pulled over because we were filming with mounts on the car. And so the director said, you guys keep going, I'm gonna leave the camera rolling. And if you listen to the scene that's in the movie, you can actually hear a siren.
Vince recounted that they didn't even think anything would come of the film. The fact was so universally accepted that the sound guy in the movie even told them as much.
The sound guy who we got, and he said, well, no one's going to see this. Like, this is fun for you and your friends. This is like a home movie. And it was a little bit of a perspective of these odds are crazy.
But the movie got Hollywood's attention after it grossed $4.6 million, earning over 18 times its budget. And Vince's life would never be the same, because now Hollywood was finally paying attention. Following the success of Swingers, he finally started to get real opportunities. He landed a supporting role in Steven Spielberg's sequel to Jurassic Park, which he found to be a uniquely special experience.
It was a different experience for sure. As you said, Swingers, we kind of shot that thing. We didn't have permits, you know, we were kind of stealing shots. And then obviously you go to a budget of a film that kind of is allowing of everything.
This is quite the jump when you think about where he was just 2 years prior. The following year, he starred as Norman Bates in the Psycho remake, and he also met David Dobkin to collaborate on Clay Pigeons, which would lay the groundwork for his career-defining role when the two would collaborate many years later on Wedding Crashers. 2001 was a special year for him, as he met Ben Stiller for the first time when he made a cameo in Zoolander, and reunited with his guy Jon Favreau to do the movie titled Made, but nothing topped Domestic Disturbance. And it's not just because the movie was his first time starring in a big-budget Hollywood flick, or even because he got to star alongside Jon Favreau and Steve Buscemi. It was also the first time he got arrested. He got into a bar fight alongside Buscemi when some 21-year-old punk attacked him with a knife. And this wouldn't be the last time something like this happened. Vaughn ultimately took a plea deal, and his assault charges were dropped in exchange for being banned from all bars in Wilmington, North Carolina, and having to attend alcohol counseling sessions, which would prove to be very relevant for what would come later in life. Vince was really living the life and accomplishing everything he had ever dreamed of. But this was just the tip of the iceberg, and things were really about to take off. Vince Vaughn's career completely exploded with Old School in 2003, and the comedy movie landscape shifted with him. But what's really crazy is that he almost wasn't even in the movie. DreamWorks viewed him as a real liability as a comedic actor, which is ironic given his resume with Swingers, Clay Pigeons, and Made. Director Todd Phillips fought for him to be in the movie.
The part that was interesting was the studio didn't know if I could do comedy. I just sort of instinctually gravitated to more kind of character-based stuff. I think he maybe had to show them an interview I did on a talk show or something to make them comfortable that I could do the comedy.
And that decision completely changed the trajectory of Vince's career, because it was the first domino to fall for the quick-witted, fast talker that we all came to love. Because just 1 year later, he'd team up with Phillips again for Starsky and Hutch, score a cameo in Anchorman, and also star alongside Ben Stiller for one of the greatest sports comedies of all time, Dodgeball. And it just kept building, because just when it looked like things couldn't possibly get any better, he had his magnum opus just 1 year later in one of the highest grossing R-rated comedies of all time, Wedding Crashers. This was really when he cemented himself as the greatest improviser of all time. It's really wild to think about just how much of this performance wasn't even scripted. It's amazing what can come of a movie when you work collaboratively, instead of a bunch of executives without a creative bone in their body micromanaging the project.
So we really just kind of rebuilt it. Old School, where we were able to do these more hard R comedies and be left alone. No one was telling us you can't say that. We were kind of young kids trying to make each other laugh, to create something that felt authentic. And Crashers was the same thing. We were really left alone to kind of build these characters, create these flawed guys.
The performance was so powerful that Bradley Cooper even said that watching Vince Vaughn improvise changed him forever. And I mean, just watch him in action. Literally none of this was in the original script.
And let's have an emerging maple syrup conglomerate.
Stupid, we don't know anything about maple syrup.
I happen to know everything there is to know about maple syrup. I love maple syrup. I like to take maple syrup and put a little bit in my hair when I've had a rough week. What do you think holds it up, Slick?
You're sitting there, you're wondering, do I have food on my face? Am I eating? Am I talking too much? Are they talking enough? Am I interested? I'm not really interested. Should I play like I'm interested, but I'm not that interested? Perhaps play a little game called Just for a second. Snap out of it. What, a hot older woman made you feel her cans? Stop crying like a little girl.
I wasn't crying like a little girl.
Motorboat? You play the motorboat? She's fit for a straitjacket. This broad's 3 ways towards the weekend. And you want to know what? I dig it. It turns me on. Yeah, it turns me on. Get in here for the real thing. I love you.
And Wedding Crashers fundamentally changed me as well, as this was the comedy that really made me fall in love with comedy films and actually inspired me to make a couple of my own. Speaking of which, you can actually see my directorial debut Rosetta Stone for free on Tubi or for $1.99 on Amazon if you hate ads. At this point, Vince was really on top of the world. But what came next wasn't just more success, but also where both his personal and professional life became more complicated than anyone could have imagined. After Wedding Crashers, he wasn't just an A-list actor, but also the key decision maker on almost every movie he worked on. Which sounds like a dream, but this was also where things started to shift more than he had hoped. Just look at his filmography. The Breakup, Fred Claus, Four Christmases, Couples Retreat, The Dilemma, and The Internship. He produced and/or co-directed each of these films. So for the first time, Vince wasn't just in these movies, he was literally shaping them at every turn. This era was full of successes, but also constant drama, including the biggest scandal over a movie trailer I've ever seen. And that moment would end up having massive implications both on Vaughn's career and the state of comedy at large. Let's start by looking at The Breakup, which I actually kinda sorta have a personal connection to in a way. Jay Lavender, one of the writers of the film, actually wrote a book on my uncle. Pretty cool. But more importantly, this movie hosted a massive shift in Vince's career. The film itself was a real departure from the kinds of Vince Vaughn comedies we were all used to. Don't get me wrong, it has its moments.
I would have brought home 24 lemons, even 100 lemons. You know what I wish? I wish everyone that was at that table had their own little private bag of lemons.
But it was also just a super angry movie and honestly put me in a bad mood upon rewatch, which is not exactly what you're looking for in a Vince Vaughn comedy. Like, I usually throw on one of these movies to laugh, relax, and forget about stress, but I found myself getting just as angry and agitated as the characters in this movie. Oh, and I totally didn't recognize that this was Jon Favreau. It gets even more wild when you see what he looks like in Four Christmases, which we'll get to in a minute. But it was also around this time that he started dating co-star Jennifer Aniston, who like Vince was one of the biggest stars in comedy thanks to her lead role in the TV show Friends, which suddenly put his life under a microscope.
Nice going on that Jennifer Aniston thing. Very nice. She's a lovely and a very nice woman.
She is a great girl. Yeah. She's a very nice girl.
And I think the two of you make a great couple, too.
It's very nice of you to say that, Dave. Thank you.
Though the relationship was short-lived, only lasting a year, and was publicly scrutinized at every point, Vaughn ultimately ended up suing 3 different tabloids over accusations of him cheating on her. This was the point when it was no longer just Vince's movies getting attention, but literally every aspect of his personal life. Despite the distractions, his career's momentum didn't slow down, and he got the Christmas spirit, starring in both Fred Claus and Four Christmases. Fred Claus was a real return to his fast-talk Wedding Crashers style improv.
You get outside, you play around, you make some friends, play kick the can, do some athletic stuff, you go to school, you're comfortable to play sports, you get a partial scholarship. Do you have any ethnic in your background, any ethnicity at all in your background?
Though it was PG and really felt out of place for his comedic style. But Four Christmases really got him back on track. This is one of my all-time favorite Christmas movies, not just because of Vince, but Reese Witherspoon is a worthy co-star, though they apparently did not like each other at all, which you really don't notice because each of their performances were really great. Jon Favreau was good too, and as I promised, just look at him in this movie compared to The Breakup. Completely unrecognizable. Like, the guy went from looking like a washed-up high school football coach to an NFL linebacker in the span of 2 years. Good for him. I just rewatched this movie with a couple of my aunts and uncles on Thanksgiving, and it really reminded me of just how powerful it can be to watch a comedy movie with other people instead of watching it alone. Like, it made the movie at least 3 times as funny, and was one of the most fun times I've had watching a movie in years, which only furthers my excitement for the soon return of comedies to theaters. And this line delivery kills me every time.
Crime bop, hee-ho bop. That's Merry Christmas in Burmese.
He followed Four Christmases up with Couples Retreat, which I'll say was by far his most unfairly hated on comedy. Like, it got 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. By no means is it peak cinema, but it's funny enough. Boasts an incredible cast, including the still-in-shape Jon Favreau, who I actually thought was the funniest actor in this movie.
Whoa, wait a second. You're going out? What are you wearing?
Shorts.
Shorts? It's a maxi pant.
Your Honor. What kind of massage do you want? You left it blank?
Korean?
And it's just a fun, classic comedy. Strong enough to merit a 6 out of 10 on IMDb for me. But what came next would be by far the most controversial movie and moment for Vince Vaughn. In fact, it's not just Vince Vaughn. This next movie would prove to have arguably the most controversial movie trailer of the 21st century. The dilemma would lead to a societal dilemma of its own after Vince delivered this line.
Gentlemen, electric cars, they're totally gay. It's true. I don't mean that they're homosexual gay, but I do mean your parents are the chaperone at the dance gay.
It's an above average joke. It's not his best. It's not his worst. You know, it's worth a light laugh, but also just not something that I really thought much of. But in one of the most bizarre developments I've ever seen, it led to a national debate over whether it's okay or not to tell a joke using the word gay in a movie. It started with Anderson Cooper's appearance on Ellen and spread across several networks.
People use these words because these words do have power and they're used like weapons. And there was a preview of a movie, and in it the actor said, "That's so gay." And I was shocked, not only that they put that in a movie, but that they put that in the preview. They thought that was okay to put in the preview to the movie to get people to go and see it. We got to do something to make those words unacceptable.
The trailer for an upcoming movie is being criticized as insensitive. CNN's Brooke Anderson says, for a town that's viewed as politically enlightened, the film The Dilemma is certainly causing one.
For the movie The Dilemma, and in that trailer you have Vince Vaughn saying electric cars are gay. GLAAD was upset about the trailer.
Erica, I'm certain this movie is probably an equal opportunity offender, but do you think very quickly that Universal should not only pull the trailer, edit that part out of the trailer, but remove the scene from the film entirely?
That's not satire. Like, that actually happened. Vince Vaughn even joined the discussion, saying, "Let me add my voice of support to the people outraged by the bullying and persecution of people for their differences, whatever those differences may be. Comedy and joking about our differences breaks tension and brings us together. Drawing dividing lines over what we can and cannot joke about does exactly that. It divides us. Most importantly, where does it stop?" Universal eventually caved to the pressure and removed the joke from the trailer, leading to suspense as to whether or not it would even make the final cut of the film. After deliberation, the line did make the final movie, which is an obvious win, but removing it from the trailer just set an awful precedent, and it paved the way for the politically correct era of comedy that we suffered through for the next decade that we're just now finally getting out of. All in all, it was a solid dramedy that did a great job balancing both the drama and comedy, with constant twists and turns. Vaughn, of course, also delivered.
Makes the whole stew stick together, and that is honesty.
And similar interests.
Who are you?
I'm Cousin Betty.
Cousin Betty, this is not a group toast, nor is it an open forum. I am the one who's standing up here. I am the one with the glass. I am the one that is talking. Nobody gave you a speaking part. Nobody cares. Which isn't even a real relative, because someone could have sex with a second cousin and the kid could still be normal.
One of the last comedies he did before everything came crashing down is also his single most underrated, and it might be the clearest example of what was going wrong. He reunited with Owen Wilson for Product Placement the Movie, also known as The Internship. I jokingly say this because the movie is about two middle-aged guys who score an internship at Google, and the entire movie essentially just showcases Google's campus and sells you on how glorifying the company is. But the dynamic Vaughn and Wilson had in Wedding Crashers wasn't lost nearly a decade later.
Either one of us are going to blow people away with our tech savviness. Maybe I would get the slight edge, only because I think you were one of the last people to even get a cell phone.
But I don't know that having cell phones necessarily, Owen, qualifies as like tech savvy.
You were still using even like that number that you would call when you were a kid to get the time and temperature.
That's right.
And Vaughn essentially plays the same exact character, guaranteeing a ton of laughs.
Under computer skills you put C++.
That's actually a C+.
What's that?
Well, the second plus is to reflect my attitude of how I felt about the C+, but it's a C+, it's a typing.
Taking food home from the office. Are you having difficulty with this, Mr. McMahon?
I'm sorry, just to drill down on this, what if it's like a perishable, like say there was a pudding or something that was left out?
You'd like to take home a pudding, would you?
I wouldn't mind taking home a pudding. I don't know anyone who wouldn't. Pizza.
Salsa chips, pudding, sushi, ice cream, and pizza.
I wouldn't take home a frozen pizza.
This movie too got slammed by critics, and aside from the fact that movie critics are some of the most pretentious people on earth and often have zero sense of humor, there was a massive problem with this movie, because the movie wasn't just misunderstood, it was fundamentally misbuilt. I recently sat down and watched the unrated version, and it's vastly different from the theatrical cut. The movie was clearly intended to be a hard R, But what they sent to theaters was this awkward, kinda sorta family-friendly film that also kinda sorta wasn't at the same time and unintentionally felt super out of place. Like, there's easily 15 minutes of genuinely hilarious dialogue from the unrated version that got cut to spare its PG-13 rating. But there's also this entire 10-ish minute sequence that got stripped from the theatrical version that seriously hinders the plot when it's removed. And I'd show you on screen what I'm talking about, but YouTube has been watching me like a hawk with age restrictions, so I can't. But I'm sure you can infer what kinds of things happened in this sequence. I say all of this because the implications of this decision were actually a big chunk of the reason why in just a couple of years, Vaughn's career would face a major death sentence, which I'll touch on momentarily. But seriously, if you've never seen The Internship or you've only seen the PG-13 version, give the unrated version a watch. These were really the golden years for Vince's career, but everything was about to come crashing down. The Internship was the beginning of the end of Vince's A-list status, but Unfinished Business was the nail in the coffin.
Why there are higher upfront costs than possibly you are used to or prefer, these are one-offs, and that over time.
At least that's how it looked on the surface. The film grossed $14.4 million at the box office, coming off of a $35 million budget. And when you account for the fact that theaters get half of all box office revenue, the studio took home roughly only $7.2 million, making it an almost $30 million loss and marking the single worst box office performance of Vaughn's career. Calling this a disaster would be putting it mildly. He was no longer trusted to star in comedies, given a run of films that either broke even after the theater's cut or just straight up lost money. But here's where things really get interesting, because what if essentially none of this had to do with Vince, but instead the studios were punishing him for their mistakes? Because when you look at what was actually happening, things start to change. Vince Vaughn is literally my favorite comedic actor of all time, so I need to come to his defense and call a spade a spade. The studio completely screwed him over. There were a few major things going on. For starters, let's go back to what I brought up with respect to The Internship clearly being meant to be an R-rated comedy. This is the most concrete example, but none of these other underperforming films were meant for PG-13 audiences. Like, The Dilemma is about a guy who finds out his best friend is being cheated on, and he agonizes over the dilemma of how and when to tell him. Not exactly a family movie. The Watch is a comedy co-starring Ben Stiller and Jonah Hill with the tagline, "Got protection." Clearly intended for adult audiences, and so were all of these movies. Studios were making these movies PG-13 to try to max out ticket sales, but the end result was that they were too watered down to not have the full effect of an R-rated comedy, yet at the same time, they were way too raunchy for families, and they kind of just end up in this no man's land where they weren't really made for anyone, which of course led to not so surprising results at the box office. But it gets so much worse. The next major issue is that the budgets on these movies were so damn large, and for no good reason, and that's where everything starts to fall apart. Let's go back to the beginning of his comedy career and look at Old School's budget. $24 million. It grossed $87.1 million, and it was viewed as such a major commercial success that Judd Apatow said it was literally the single reason why the studio made Anchorman.
Will Ferrell was in Old School, and that opened the floodgates, and that made them want to make Anchorman, which Will wrote with Adam McKay, and Adam directed it, and I produced it.
But what if Old School had the $80 million budget that Four Christmases had? Well, it'd instead be viewed as a colossal failure. But then let's turn it around and look at what were considered to be two major flops near the end of his peak. The Watch grossed $68.3 million off of its $68 million budget and was viewed as an awful flop. But if it had the $24 million Old School budget, it would have made a modest profit. The Dilemma's $69.7 million box office performance would have been a positive signal to studios, instead of being viewed as a failed experiment because it carried a $70 million budget. And the most frustrating part is that there was literally zero reason for these budgets to be as big as they were. I say this with love, as Vince has made me laugh harder than any other actor, but the bulk of these movies are just Vince's character in a room talking to another character, not some spectacle film full of exquisite action sequences. There's just no reason these budgets should have been as big as they were. But because of the poor planning by Hollywood executives, Vince was the one who took the fall. And it was around this time that the whole industry got super politically correct, and instead of making proven comedies like Old School, Dodgeball, and Wedding Crashers, Hollywood tried to reinvent the wheel and made comedies that Vince just didn't have a place in anymore. And if this wasn't bad enough, it was also around this time that Vince made headlines for the wrong reasons when he got arrested for a DUI in 2018. If this mugshot doesn't say, "I'm rich and famous, everything will be okay," I don't know what does. Whenever this happens, I always wonder why people who are worth tens of millions of dollars can't spend $20 on an Uber. And yet again, his most severe punishment was having to take an alcohol education course. And for the next 6-year stretch, he only had one lead comedic role, and with his luck, it happened during COVID. It was a horror comedy called Freaky. It actually got a theatrical release, and I was fortunate enough to see it in theaters. I really liked this one, and considering the climate at the time, doing $18 million off of a $6 million budget was actually a huge win. But given how Hollywood seems to have zero understanding for how these things work, instead of saying this guy still has real box office power, they likely framed it as Vince Vaughn can only bring in $18 million nowadays. He's no longer a draw. Because he didn't get a lead role again for 5 years until the 2025 Netflix comedy Nonas. And I'll be honest, I haven't seen it. I try to stay away from straight-to-streaming movies at all costs. He of course also had a run on television, including Curb Your Enthusiasm and Bad Monkey, but he was nowhere near as big as he was at his peak. And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the 2022 Christmas comedy he wrote and produced, titled Christmas with the Campbells, which is essentially a Hallmark movie, except all the dialogue is super R-rated. Honestly, it was actually pretty funny for what it was.
I think I'm holding you back.
Are you breaking up with me?
Baby, we did things right, you know? We kept the fights clean and the sex dirty. I mean, you keep that pussy so fresh.
But Vince was given a real kick in the ass by Hollywood, and not because he personally fell off, but because of their own wrongdoing. But what if this is just the calm before the storm, and Vince is getting ready for his big comeback? Because the signs are already here. He recently got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
You, my friend, have a star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
And this really seemed to be the first spark to ignite his return. Something that really pops out to me is that Vince has generally been a really private person and didn't do a ton of public appearances even in his heyday, but you've recently seen him do several long-form podcasts, including Hot Ones and Theo Vaughn, and that's not random. That usually means someone is trying to remind the world they're still here, and usually that's because something big is coming. And that something big might be the fact that he's actually starring in 2 R-rated comedies coming out this year. Mike and Nick and Alice just premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival, and the foolish decision has already been made to release it straight to streaming. In fact, by the time this video is released, it'll actually already be on Hulu. And as much as I hate streamers, I actually might get a 1-month Hulu subscription because I heard that this is just classic Vince Vaughn that we all came to love from back in the day. And then there's Animal Friends, co-starring Ryan Reynolds, which is another R-rated comedy and is being released June 5th. There have also been ongoing talks of both Dodgeball and Wedding Crashers sequels. With comedy movies finally coming back to theaters, especially R-rated ones with the same style as when Vince Vaughn was on top of the acting world, there's literally no better time for him to jump back into Hollywood. Because it's not just 1 or 2 R-rated comedies reminiscent of the 2000s making their return to the big screen. There's a full-on shift happening in the industry right now. We're getting a packed slate of comedies coming, and it all starts in a couple of months with Scary Movie 6. Which will be the first domino to fall in this style of comedy movie dominating movie theaters again. I break down exactly why this is here.